North Atlantic, 43 degrees north latitude, March 17, 1943. Signalman second class. Thomas Morrison stood on the bridge wing of the destroyer escort Samuel Roberts, his fingers wrapped around a pair of binoculars that had cost him $12.95 from the Sears Roebuck catalogue. The seas rolled in 12-foot swells beneath a sky the color of gunmetal, and somewhere in those grey waters, German submarines prowled for merchant vessels. Every man aboard believed that the new radar equipment mounted on their mast would see the enemy long before human eyes could pierce the Atlantic haze. They would learn in the next 6 hours how catastrophically wrong that assumption could be. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It really helps support the channel. What none of them understood yet was that Morrison's bargain store binoculars, mocked by every officer and enlisted man on the ship, would become the only thing standing between convoy HX-229 and complete disaster. The technology they trusted would fail them. The human eye they dismissed would save them all. Morrison had joined the naval service in January of 1942, 3 weeks after his 21st birthday. He came from a farming family in rural Nebraska, where the closest thing to an ocean was the Platte River after spring flooding. His first posting had been to a supply depot in Brooklyn, where he spent 9 months cataloging spare parts and learning to hate the smell of diesel fuel. When orders finally came through for sea duty, he purchased the binoculars from a shop near the Navy Yard, spending nearly a quarter of his monthly pay on the best optics he could afford. The mockery began the first day he reported aboard the Samuel Roberts. Chief Petty Officer Douglas Henshaw, a career Navy man with 18 years of service, had examined the binoculars with the expression of someone inspecting spoiled meat. He turned them over in his weathered hands, squinting at the modest Sears logo stamped into the casing. "These are what you are bringing to anti-submarine warfare?" Henshaw had asked, his voice carrying across the cramped bridge. "You could get better optics in a cereal box, Morrison." The other signalman had laughed. Even Lieutenant Commander Robert Vance, the ship's executive officer, had permitted himself a thin smile. The Samuel Roberts, after all, carried the latest SC radar system, capable of detecting surfaced submarines at ranges exceeding 10,000 yards. They also had trained radar operators, experienced lookouts with Navy-issue binoculars that cost more than Morrison made in 2 months, and a captain who had sunk 3 enemy vessels in the previous year. What they needed, Morrison had been told repeatedly, was men who could follow orders and stay alert. What they did not need was farm boys with department store binoculars pretending to be submarine hunters. Morrison had accepted the ridicule without complaint. He kept his Sears binoculars cleaned and adjusted. He stood his watches on time. He learned the difference between a whale's blow and a periscope's feather wake, and he waited for the moment when his eyes, trained by years of scanning Nebraska horizons for approaching storms, might prove their worth. The convoy they were escorting consisted of 41 merchant ships, stretched across 6 square miles of ocean like scattered dominoes. The vessels carried aviation fuel, ammunition, canned food, tanks, trucks, and 10,000 other items necessary to keep the forces fighting in Europe supplied. The manifests documented enough material to sustain 3 infantry divisions for 2 months. Together, the cargo represented $17 million in equipment and supplies, loaded at ports from Halifax to New York, now crawling eastward at 8 knots toward Liverpool. Protecting these ships were 6 escorts. The Samuel Roberts, smallest of the group, displaced only 1,400 tons. Her crew numbered 215 men. She carried 3 3-inch guns, depth charges, and enough fuel oil to patrol for 3,000 miles. She also carried that new SC radar, which the Navy had installed 6 months earlier at considerable expense. Lieutenant James Thorpe, the radar operator that morning, sat in the cramped radar room watching the green sweep of the scope. He was 23 years old, educated at MIT before the conflict began, and considered himself part of the technological vanguard transforming naval operations. The radar could, theoretically, detect surface contacts out to 15 miles in good conditions. It represented the cutting edge of electronic warfare. "The scope shows clear," Thorpe reported over the intercom to the bridge. "No surface contacts within detection range." On the bridge, Captain William Hargrove nodded with satisfaction. Hargrove had commanded destroyers in the Pacific before transferring to Atlantic convoy duty. He was 41 years old, a graduate of Annapolis, and he believed absolutely in the superiority of American technology and training. His ship had never lost a merchant vessel under escort. "Very well," Hargrove said. "Maintain standard search pattern. All lookouts stay alert." Morrison stood his watch on the port bridge wing, his cheap binoculars scanning the horizon. The wind cut through his peacoat, carrying spray that tasted of salt and diesel exhaust. Around him, the convoy plodded forward, cargo ships belching black smoke from coal-fired boilers. Some dated from the previous global conflict. Others were Liberty ships, hastily welded together in shipyards that operated 24 hours a day. All of them were vulnerable. The German submarine service had developed new tactics that year. Their boats hunted in coordinated groups, called wolf packs, directed by radio communications from command centers in occupied France. They preferred to attack on the surface at night, using their low profile and speed to close on convoys before diving to escape counterattack. The submarines carried 23 torpedoes each, and their crews were trained to fire from multiple angles simultaneously. But they also had weaknesses. Surface radar could detect them, aircraft could spot them from above, and they had to expose periscopes or conning towers to navigate and attack, creating opportunities for alert lookouts to sound the alarm. That morning, however, conditions favored the submarines. A fog bank had settled across the convoy's projected route, reducing visibility to less than 3,000 yards. The overcast sky grounded air support, and somewhere in that grey obscurity, according to intelligence reports decoded 2 days earlier, at least 4 German submarines were converging on their position. Morrison swept his binoculars across the swells, checking the same sector he had scanned 1,000 times during the past month. He saw waves, whitecaps, and the distant silhouettes of merchant ships wallowing through the chop. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. "Still looking for submarines with those toy binoculars, Morrison?" The voice belonged to Signalman First Class Peter Kowalski, who had just climbed up to relieve the starboard lookout. Kowalski carried Navy-issue optics that weighed twice what Morrison's did. "You know radar has already checked this sector, right? If there was anything out there, Thorpe would have called it in." "I know," Morrison replied evenly. "Just doing my job." "Your job is to back up the technology, not replace it," Kowalski said. "Those Sears binoculars are not going to spot anything our radar misses." "Probably not," Morrison agreed. But he kept scanning anyway. At 10:45 hours, the fog thickened. Visibility dropped to 1,500 yards, then 1,000. The convoy began to lose formation as ships struggled to maintain position without seeing their neighbors. Radio traffic increased as captains requested course adjustments and speed changes. In the radar room, Thorpe frowned at his scope. The fog was creating clutter, false returns bouncing off the dense water vapor. He adjusted the gain, trying to filter out the interference, but the screen remained messy. Surface contacts were becoming harder to distinguish from weather. "Captain, the radar is experiencing reduced effectiveness in these conditions," Thorpe reported. "I am getting multiple false returns from the fog bank." Hargrove considered this information. Naval doctrine called for increased vigilance when radar performance degraded. He ordered general quarters, sending the crew to combat stations. Watertight doors clanged shut throughout the ship. Gun crews loaded ammunition. The Samuel Roberts began zigzagging at 15 knots, a defensive pattern designed to make torpedo solutions difficult. "All lookouts, maintain maximum alertness," Hargrove announced over the public address system. "Visual search is now our primary detection method." Morrison heard the announcement and felt his pulse quicken. This was what he had trained for. He raised his Sears binoculars and began a systematic scan, dividing the visible horizon into segments and checking each one methodically. The fog swirled around the ship, creating phantoms and shadows that disappeared when he focused on them. Time passed. 1100 hours became 11:30. The convoy continued its eastern crawl. Tension mounted on every escort as crews waited for contact that might not come. At 11:52, Morrison saw something. It was barely there, a darkness in the fog that might have been nothing, a smudge that could have been a whale or a wave crest or simply his imagination. He focused his binoculars on the spot, waiting for it to appear again. The fog parted for just a moment. Morrison glimpsed a low, dark shape cutting through the swells, perhaps 4,000 yards away. It showed no superstructure, no mast, nothing that would create a large radar return. Just a hull, dark grey, almost black, moving perpendicular to the convoy's course. "Contact," Morrison called out. "Bearing 270 relative, distance approximately 4,000 yards. Submarine." The bridge erupted with activity. Hargrove grabbed his binoculars and pointed them in the direction Morrison indicated. "Thorpe, check bearing 270, Hargrove ordered. In the radar room, Thorpe centered his antenna on the specified bearing. The scope showed nothing but fog clutter. "Negative contact, Captain. Radar shows no surface vessels at that bearing." "Look out, Morrison. Can you still see the contact?" Hargrove demanded. Morrison stared through his binoculars, willing the fog to clear again. The shape had vanished. "I have lost visual, sir." But it was there. Low profile, moving fast, submarine characteristics. Chief Henshaw appeared on the bridge wing. "Sir?" "Morrison has been jumpy all morning. With respect, those binoculars are not exactly precision instruments. He might have seen a wave." Hargrove faced a decision that would define his career. He could ignore the report, trusting his radar and the judgment of experienced officers who doubted Morrison's cheap optics, or he could act on a single unconfirmed sighting by the youngest, least experienced lookout on the ship. He made his choice in 3 seconds. "Sound general quarters for submarine contact," Hargrove ordered. "Plot. Come left to course 270. Increase speed to 20 knots. Radio room. Alert the convoy of possible submarine contact bearing west-southwest of formation." The Samuel Roberts heeled into the turn, her engines building to full power. Behind them, the convoy began emergency maneuvers, ships scattering to present harder targets. Morrison kept his binoculars locked on the sector where he had spotted the shape. "Come on," he whispered. "Show yourself." At that exact moment, 1,200 yards from where Morrison had indicated, Captain Lieutenant Hans Weber surfaced his submarine for a final position check before attacking. Weber commanded U-517, a Type 9C boat that had departed from the French port of Lorient 3 weeks earlier. His war patrol had been frustrating so far, with only one small freighter sunk. The convoy ahead represented redemption, loaded targets with minimal escort protection. Weber had approached on the surface, using the fog as cover. His submarine's low profile, combined with a special rubberized coating applied to the conning tower, significantly reduced radar returns. German engineers had discovered that certain materials could absorb radar energy rather than reflecting it, making their boats harder to detect electronically. U-517 was coated with this experimental compound, making it nearly invisible to Allied radar in certain conditions. Weber believed he was undetected. His sound operator reported no contacts. The fog concealed his periscope. He prepared to close within torpedo range of the convoy's main body. Then the fog lifted slightly, and Weber saw the American destroyer Escort charging directly toward his position. "Emergency dive," Weber shouted. "Take her down fast." His crew reacted with practiced efficiency. Ballast tanks flooded. The boat tilted downward, slipping beneath the waves in 45 seconds. But those 45 seconds gave Morrison one more glimpse through his Sears binoculars. "Contact confirmed," Morrison called. "Submarine diving, same bearing. Estimate 1,200 yards. Now Hargrove could see it too, the swirl of disturbed water where the submarine had submerged, the foam trail leading away toward deeper water. The captain grabbed the intercom. "Thorpe, do you have sonar contact?" "Wait one, sir." Thorpe's voice was tense. "Sonar reports possible contact, bearing 268, range estimated at 1,400 yards. Contact is moving away from convoy at high speed. Prepare depth charge pattern," Hargrove ordered. "We are going to prosecute this contact." What followed was a textbook anti-submarine attack. The Samuel Roberts raced to the submarine's last known position, her sonar pinging steadily. Weber's boat tried to evade, diving to 300 feet and turning hard to port, but the destroyer Escort stayed on top of him. At precisely calculated intervals, depth charges rolled off the stern rails, each one containing 300 pounds of explosive set to detonate at specific depths. The charges created massive underwater concussions, generating pressure waves that could crush a submarine's hull if they exploded close enough. Weber's boat shook with each blast, instruments shattering, men thrown against bulkheads. The rubberized coating that made his submarine stealthy did nothing to protect against the hammer blows of high explosives. After the third pattern, U-517 surfaced involuntarily, blown to the surface by damage to its diving planes. The crew abandoned ship in 90 seconds. Weber was the last man off, watching his command sink stern first into the Atlantic. The Samuel Roberts picked up 37 survivors, including Weber himself. The remaining 6 crew members had perished when the depth charges ruptured a forward compartment. Morrison watched the German sailors climb aboard his ship, their faces showing shock and exhaustion. Weber, when he came over the rail, looked directly at Morrison for a moment. 2 young men who had been trying to eliminate each other minutes before. Chief Henshaw approached Morrison as the prisoners were led below deck. The chief's expression was complicated, mixing respect with reluctance. "That was good work, Morrison. Your eyes made the difference today." "Just got lucky, sir," Morrison said. "Right place, right time." "Luck," Henshaw repeated. "Sure. Let me see those binoculars." Morrison handed them over. Henshaw examined them again, this time without mockery. He checked the focus mechanism, tested the eye relief, and looked through them at the horizon. After a moment, he returned them. "You know what?" Henshaw said. "These are not bad. Not bad at all. For $12.95, you got decent optics. More importantly, you kept them clean and you knew how to use them. That matters more than the price tag." "Thank you, Chief," Morrison said. The convoy continued eastward, -1 German submarine. In the wardroom that evening, Captain Hargrove debriefed his officers on the action. Lieutenant Thorpe was there, looking subdued. The radar operator had learned an expensive lesson about technology's limitations. The submarine was coated with some kind of material that reduced its radar signature, Thorpe explained. Combined with the fog and the low profile, our radar simply could not detect it at that range. Morrison's visual sighting was the only warning we had. Hargrove looked at Morrison, who stood at attention near the door. "Signalman Morrison, you saved merchant ships today, possibly hundreds of lives. That deserves recognition." "Just doing my job, sir," Morrison replied. "You did more than your job," Hargrove said. "You demonstrated something every sailor needs to remember. Technology is a tool, not a replacement for human judgment and observation. Radar is valuable, but it has limitations. Your eyes, trained and alert, saw what our electronics missed." The captain paused, then continued. "I am recommending you for commendation. More importantly, I want you to know that every man on this ship respects what you did today." Morrison felt his face flush. "Thank you, sir." In the weeks that followed, the story of Morrison's Sears Binoculars spread through the Atlantic fleet. Other ships reported increased visual lookout effectiveness as crews stopped relying solely on radar. The Navy began studying the limitations of electronic detection and developing better training for optical observers. The German submarine service learned their own lesson. The rubberized coating that made U-517 stealthy had given them false confidence. Weber, interviewed as a prisoner of war, revealed the coating's properties and limitations. Allied intelligence immediately disseminated information about these stealth modifications to all escort commanders, warning them not to rely exclusively on radar detection. Morrison continued serving aboard the Samuel Roberts for another 18 months. He participated in 7 more convoy operations and was present when the ship supported operations during the invasion of France in June 1944. He kept his Sears binoculars throughout the conflict, maintaining them carefully, using them every watch. Other sailors stopped mocking the cheap optics. Some even wrote to Sears Roebuck ordering similar models, figuring that if they worked for Morrison, they might work for anyone. The company, learning of Morrison's story through letters from servicemen, featured his binoculars in a catalogue advertisement in late 1944, though they tactfully did not mention the mockery he had endured. When the conflict ended, Morrison returned to Nebraska with the binoculars in his sea bag. He had been offered advanced training and promotion if he stayed in the service, but he wanted to return to farming, to work land instead of sailing over it. He married his high school sweetheart 3 months after discharge. They had 4 children, He rarely spoke about his naval service, except to tell his grandchildren about the importance of doing your job well, regardless of what tools you have to work with. The Samuel Roberts survived the conflict and was decommissioned in 1947. She had escorted 63 convoys across the Atlantic, protecting more than 3,000 merchant vessels. She received 5 battle stars for her service. The ship was eventually scrapped in 1963, her steel recycled into new vessels. Weber, the German submarine commander, spent 3 years in a prisoner of war camp in Manitoba, Canada. After the conflict ended, he returned to Germany and became a merchant ship officer, eventually commanding cargo vessels in the North Sea trade. He never forgot the moment when the American destroyer appeared out of the fog, materializing as if summoned by magic. He learned later about Morrison's visual sighting and felt a strange respect for the young sailor who had spotted his supposedly stealthy submarine. The story contained lessons that echoed through military history. Technology offers advantages, but it creates dependencies that can be exploited or can fail at critical moments. Human observation, properly trained and supported, remains irreplaceable, and the value of equipment is not measured by its cost, but by the skill and dedication of the person using it. In 1943, sophisticated radar systems had cost tens of thousands of dollars to develop and install. They represented the cutting edge of wartime technology, backed by scientific research and industrial investment. Morrison's binoculars, costing $12.95 from a department store catalog, had seemed laughably inadequate by comparison. But on one grey morning in the North Atlantic, when fog and experimental stealth coating combined to blind electronic eyes, those cheap binoculars had been exactly what was needed. They had given Morrison the chance to prove that alertness, training, and dedication mattered more than expensive equipment. The convoy that Morrison helped protect delivered its cargo safely to Liverpool. The aviation fuel-powered bombers that struck industrial targets across occupied Europe. The ammunition supplied infantry divisions fighting through France and into Germany. The food fed soldiers and civilians. The trucks and tanks equipped armored units. All of it, every ton of material, reached its destination because one young signalman with budget binoculars had trusted his eyes when technology failed. Morrison kept those binoculars for the rest of his life. They sat on a shelf in his Nebraska farmhouse, carefully maintained but rarely used. When visitors asked about them, he would tell the story simply, without embellishment or drama. He spotted a submarine. His captain believed him. They did their jobs, that was all. But to the hundreds of merchant sailors who reached England safely that March, to the crews of the ships that escaped attack, to the soldiers who received the supplies those vessels carried, it had been everything. Morrison's cheap binoculars, mocked and dismissed, had written a small chapter in the vast history of the Atlantic campaign. They had proven that even the simplest tools, wielded by dedicated hands, could make the difference between success and catastrophe. The technological revolution in naval warfare continued after 1945. Radar improved dramatically. Sonar became more sophisticated. Eventually, computers and satellites would transform how ships detected threats and navigated oceans. But every advance in technology brought new vulnerabilities and limitations. And every generation of sailors had to relearn the lesson Morrison demonstrated that foggy March morning: trust your instruments, but never forget how to trust your eyes. The conflict in the Atlantic had been won through industrial production, technological innovation, code-breaking intelligence, and strategic coordination. Thousands of ships, millions of tons of supplies, countless acts of courage and sacrifice had combined to achieve victory. But it had also been won through small moments of individual vigilance, through sailors like Morrison who did their jobs well, regardless of mockery or doubt. His story became part of the Naval Service's unofficial curriculum, passed from veteran to recruit, a reminder that expensive equipment means nothing without the human beings trained to use it effectively. It taught that innovation comes in many forms, including the simple act of keeping your eyes open and believing what you see, even when machines tell you otherwise. And it demonstrated that respect should be earned through performance, not assumed through cost. Morrison's $12 binoculars had earned more respect than any piece of equipment on the Samuel Roberts, not because they were technologically superior, but because the man using them never stopped doing his job to the best of his ability. The fog lifted from the North Atlantic that afternoon, revealing clear horizons and safe seas. The convoy continued eastward. Morrison returned to his watch station, his Sears binoculars hanging from their strap around his neck, and somewhere in the cold waters behind them, U-517 settled onto the ocean floor, a testament to the truth that wars are won not by the most expensive weapons but by the most alert warriors. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Do not forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.